Hello and welcome to CS230. This is Lecture 12, Lesson 2, and in this particular lesson we're going to look at Model View, View Model, and specifically we're going to look at aspects of two-way binding with MVVM. Last lesson we looked at Model View Controller, and we saw that there was separation between the model, the view, and the controller, and the view didn't know anything about the model didn't know anything about the view, and all that kind of stuff. So really what we want to see here now is this connection between the data, that's the information that's held in the model, and that's sometimes referred to as the domain object, and the view, okay, and the view model. So we'll see it a little bit more detail as we work through this example. Okay, so remember, the model usually only contains the information, but not the behaviors or services that manipulate that information. That's done by the business logic, and that's kept separate from the model, and it's encapsulated in other classes that act on the model. So like a view model or the controller or something. Okay, so some authors in the literature will tell us that like models may contain some validation methods. Okay, so that's something that's useful. And there's a really nice readable article, this jeremylikeness.com, and it has a really good one, in terms of trying to understand this whole idea of model design and so forth. So it's worth a read. You can click through on the link there. Okay, so you could think of the model then as some JSON object. We saw that in the last one as well. So so here's an example that they use where they just refer to very, very simple lists of items that we've seen over and over again. Okay, so but that's pretty straightforward model stuff. Okay, the view then is usually the only thing that the end user actually interacts with, and that's just a presentation of the model data. And a good example of that is date storage in a model, for example. So a date might be stored in the model as the number of seconds is midnight January 1970, the usual story. But to the end user, it has to be presented with the month, name, the date, and the year in their local time zone. Okay, so that's how it might be. You can see the difference here between views and the actual model. So a view can have behaviors such as accepting input, like the view manages the key presses the buttons. We saw that in the last example as well, where we were just pressing buttons. Okay, so one thing to remember with the view is it's not responsible for maintaining its state. It synchronizes with the view model. So the view model then is key. It introduces the presentation separation, so it keeps the view separate from the model. So instead of making a model aware of the user's view of a date, for example, it converts the date to the display format. The model just holds the date, and the view simply holds the format of date. And the controller acts as this liaison between the two. So the controller might take the input from the view, place it on the model, or interact with the service to retrieve the model, and then translate the properties and place it on the view. So that's how it works. So the view model also exposes methods, commands, and all sorts of other points that help maintain the state of the view. These manipulate the model as a result of actions on the view, and then they trigger events in the view itself. So it's nice. So we can, I've given you some summary here, and you can have a look at this about the difference between the view and the view model, and the view model and the view and the model. Okay, so it gets a bit complicated, but if you take your time and work through it, it'll be fine. So really, what we should see is that there is this connection between the view and the view model, and the view model is ensuring that what happens in the view is in the model, and what's in the model is in the view. So you see these things happening back and forth. Nice examples. So what's really important here is that there is this data mining between what the view and the view model. So we really need to be able to understand that model view model is all about setting up this data binding between the various elements. So from our perspective, we might have a JavaScript object that's somewhere in our application code. And you could think of it as the example that you have in one of your assignments. So you have a table data. You could have the table as some data, and then the view of the table is what's seen. And if something changes in the table on the display, it needs to be updated in the model. And if something happens to the model, it needs to be updated in the view, and that binding has to happen automatically. And we need to be able to have ways to do that. We can, of course. Okay, here's some nice examples of how you might understand and go into more detail on data binding. But anyway, what we want to do, of course, we just want to see the code. So we're going to look at a couple of plain old code examples. They're short, very short. Two-way binding is really complex to implement, and we're just going to go at a very simple way just to show you how it works. That's why we use frameworks. Okay, we use frameworks to do this and make life easy for us, and we'll see that a little bit later. But we can do it. We can do it ourselves. We have to be able to do it because frameworks for JavaScript are written in JavaScript, so it has to be possible to do in JavaScript. So I want to show you. So You can make this work with a few lines of code, and there's lots of ways to do it. We'll just look at a couple. So we're going to look at programs demo 2 and demo 3. And again, I took some modified examples from Stack Overflow. There's some great resources for implementing model view model in vanilla JavaScript. You'll never have to do this beyond, maybe a question in an exam. And I'm saying it's going to come up in an exam, of course. But you might have to know at a core level, or you might be in a position where you're trying to write a new framework and you have to understand how it works at the basic. Okay. So the purpose of this particular exercise really is to gain some understanding about how frameworks make data binding happen. Okay, and here's some nice examples. You can look at any of these articles. You don't have to read all of them. They're just there for you to look at. Okay, so let's jump into the code. Okay. So demo 2, again, we have a little random number generator, and we have a similar thing the last time. We had a form this time, to show our data. It's very nice. We're setting up our script. Here we have the view model, okay, and we have some getter and setters, okay. Gets the username, gets the user number. Slightly different syntax here for getting and setting, and just doing it differently so that you can see there's lots of ways of building objects and getters and setters. We're setting the username, we're setting the user number, and what happens when we get a submit button. And that's all happening in the view model, okay? The view is here, this is the view, okay? The view is the form that's on screen, the view model. And you might say, where's the model? Actually, well, the model, it's not a great design because the model is here, included in the actual view model. So it's just a way to do this. So let's have a look and see how it works. So again, let's see if we can get this display a little bigger. We can. Okay, so here's the username, the number. We'll update. So we're updating the view. So again, we have the same sort of thing happening. And if we look at this, we can see that there's no username, and I have the console because I have a little event handler that's writing to the display as well. I'll just type my name in there, submit, and we see that it's happening here. Submit, submit, submit. Nothing's happening. We're changing the model and the view model, and it automatically changes. So it automatically, see what's happening here? We don't have to click to submit. There's this binding between the two. Okay, let's jump in and have a quick look at the code again. Okay, so again, we're looking at the get element by ID here, and we're getting the get element ID for the username, user number, and we're saying that when somebody clicks, we update the view model. Something happens here, we're updating the view model, okay, with the value. So it's this connection, this two-way binding between these. Okay, that's another way to look at this. So this is another program, the demo 3. It pretty works much the same. Okay, so this one again is it changes the view. So as I update some data in here, we see that there's this two-way binding between this and this. So I'm just changing it here. Let's lock the display. So I'm changing here, and we have automatically changing the view. So this is our link into the model, and this is the view model. So we're working here, and we can change that back again. Have a look at the code. Demo 3, and this one we're actually having the two-way binding. It's a little bit different, and it's a very short one. So we're updating the model, the view. We have information that we have a method. We have our model here is separate this time. Here's our model. Here's our view model. And what the view model does is it takes some information to the view, some data to the view, or it takes some data to the model, okay? And all it does is just make sure that everything is back and forth. And it does some little bit of work here with regular expressions to ensure that we update the model view element and the model view. We initialize it and so forth. This is done in a very particular way using this iffy function here, okay, and I've given a little bit of extra code in here. It's an immediately invoked function expression, and I've given you some detail on how that all works, okay, and you can play with it and try it if you want to learn a little bit more JavaScript. But okay, another example of just simple example of two-way binding, okay. We can change the data in here and it looks nice, okay. So really what's core here is that we looked at simple, pure JavaScript approaches to implementing the model view, view model, and two-way binding. These are core in the middle, they're really core to, say, AngularJS, React.js, these kind of frameworks, and it's important that you have a sense of understanding that this is what it's all about. Model, view, view model. Okay, thank you very much for watching.